Hi everyone, and I hope you're having a great week. It was a day that started out full of grief, of loss, of mourning, but a day that ended in joy, restoration, celebration and praise. And the difference is because Jesus got involved and acted in loving power. And this raises a challenge for me. When we, as followers of Jesus, see difficult situations and try to get involved, are we able to bring something of the compassion, the love and power of Jesus into those situations and make a really positive difference? Or do we sometimes just add to the problem? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's think about the story that we're reflecting on this week. Jesus, his disciples and a large crowd of people were walking towards a town called Nain. There was probably a lot of chatter going on. People would have been buzzing about what Jesus had done recently in restoring a very sick servant to health. There would have been laughter and excitement to see what Jesus would do next. But as they approached the city, they meet another large crowd, this time coming out of the city towards them. But no laughter here, no excitement, just tears, sorrowful chanting and grief as they prepared to bury the only son of a widow. So this was not the first funeral procession she'd been involved in. Some time ago, we don't know how long, they would have carried her dead husband out to be buried. Then she would have been accompanied and supported by her son. Now she was alone. So this was a personal tragedy for her, as she had lost those she loved and who were closest to her, but also a major change to her own situation. In those days, it was generally men who provided for their families, and so being a widow with no remaining sons would be difficult for her. The laws given to God's people showed that he cared deeply for widows and that God's people were to look after them. So she would find herself dependent on those around her to provide for her. Her life had changed. And Jesus, as he encounters this crowd, as he encounters this woman, was presented with a choice. What should he do? He could have continued on his journey. He surely had places to be, things to do. He could have got those who were with him to stand quietly as a sign of respect as the funeral procession passed by. He, along with his followers, could have turned round and joined in the funeral procession so they could pay their respects to the widow and recognise her loss. But Jesus chooses to not do any of these things. He chooses instead to get directly involved in a powerful and totally unexpected way. Before Jesus says anything, before Jesus does anything, we see that the sight of this grieving woman affected him deeply. Luke 7:13 tells us his heart went out to her. There was compassion. There would have been many funerals in the time of Jesus. It would not have been the first or only one he would have seen. But he does not seem to make a habit of intervening. This is the only account we have of something exactly like this happening, although there are other stories of Jesus bringing people back to life in different circumstances. We don't know why Jesus was affected particularly by this one, but I wonder if it reminded him of his own mother's situation. It is generally assumed that Mary's husband, Joseph, died between the time when Jesus reached his 12th birthday, the age of maturity for a man, and when he started his public ministry. So Jesus, as the eldest son, would have taken on responsibility for leading his family and providing for his mother. Ahead of him was his death on a cross, and he knew the pain that this would cause his mother. Yes, she had other children to help care for her, but the loss would be difficult. Was this in his mind as he saw this widow having lost her only son? We don't know, but something caused him to have deep compassion towards her, and that compassion caused him to act. Now, in line with the custom of the day, the woman would have been at the head of the funeral procession. So as Jesus starts to engage with her, there's something very public going on. But even in that setting, Jesus is focused on the individual and her loss. And in verse 13, he speaks to the woman and he tells her not to cry. I'm sure we've all come across different ways we could use these types of words, such as, there's nothing to be upset about, stop making a fuss, stop crying. But that's not the idea here. Rather, Jesus is reaching out to the woman and telling her that there will soon be no need for her to cry, as he's going to do something about the situation. He recognises the grief she is in, but he wants her to know that this is soon to disappear. What would she have thought? What would those around her have made of this? What talk would have started to spread through the crowd? Whatever it was soon to be replaced by something much more amazing. Because, moved by compassion, and having spoken comforting words to the grieving widow, Jesus follows up with action. He touches the bier, probably a simple plank of wood with a raised edge or just an open basket. The body, wrapped in a shroud, would have been clearly visible. So touching it, that action in itself would have been a shock to the watching crowds, as touching a dead body, which Jesus was clearly very close to doing, caused ritual impurity and would involve being seen as unclean for 7 days, probably resulting in the need to socially isolate for a week. But this does not concern Jesus. He's focused on bringing blessing and healing and life. And he then speaks again, this time not to the widow, but to the young man. And in verse 14, he commands him to get up. He does. Jesus returns into his mother. The crowds are amazed. They recognise that a great prophet is amongst them and give praise to God. Grief turned to joy. That which was lost was restored. Mourning turned to celebration. We know so very little about the woman in the story, only that she was a widow who had lost her only son. We don't know her name. We have no record of anything she might have said. But this short story that surrounds her tells us much about Jesus and how we, as his people, are called to bring blessing into the lives of others. And the process that Jesus goes through in this story is interesting. He sees, he notices that something is going on. He's touched by the woman's grief and is concerned for her. He speaks gently and kindly to her. He does not allow the conventions of the day to stop him acting. He acts powerfully to bring blessing back into her life. What does this say to us? How does this challenge us as followers of Jesus today? Are we aware of what is going on around us? Do we notice situations of need? Do we recognise those who are in distress? Are we open to the prompting of the Spirit to see what is really going on in people's lives? And when we see those things, when we see those situations, when we see those people, how do we respond? Do we put up barriers and say that that's nothing to do with me? Or are we open to being compassionate towards those who are struggling? And we will each be affected by different things, different situations, and want to get involved in different ways. And that is really good. Are we the sort of people who can speak words of comfort and hope and blessing to those who are struggling? I think this becomes more and more likely as we allow ourselves to really recognise what is going on in someone's lives, as our hearts are touched and we want to do something about it. We do not need to have all the answers. We do need to show that we care, and sometimes that's just being there. Sometimes it's speaking into a situation, sometimes it's acting. Because once we have offered hope, are we prepared to act? And even if we do want to help, even if we do want to act, we can often see barriers in the way. Some of these barriers are real. Some we can be very good at putting in place ourselves. Are we prepared to break down those barriers, just as Jesus did, so that we can be a blessing to others? And this leaves us, I think, with an important question. What are we as individuals and as church doing in the name and power of Jesus to bring positive change and blessing into people's lives? Moving between kind words, which are really important, going past barriers and blockages and bringing real blessing into people's lives. Recently, I heard a powerful story of how this had been done in the past here, and I'm aware that there are many instances of this going on all around us. In our last Wednesday evening prayer meeting, we were reflecting on the work of Acts that has been a blessing to so many. These are great examples of recognizing a need and responding. Let's continue to allow ourselves to be changed by the need that we see around us. Let's continue to bring words of comfort and blessing. Let's continue to act to make a difference. One of the things I love about the work that Tim, Chris and those who support them do with CAP is that the financial service they offer is freely available to everyone. But they make it clear that they are doing it because of the difference Jesus has made in their lives and the resulting desire to bring help and blessing to others. They recognise the need. They bring comfort by what they say. They help bring about real and meaningful change in people's lives. And we will all have opportunity to bring comfort and blessing to those we meet. Let's be those who recognise what's going on. Let's be those whose hearts are touched and changed with compassion. Let's take those opportunities in the name and the power of Jesus to change people's lives and to point people to him, the one whose example we follow and by whose spirit we work and act to bring God's kingdom into this place. Here are some questions to think about. What situations do you see around you that causes you to respond with a deep sense of compassion? What barriers can get in the way of making a real difference in people's lives? How do we overcome them? And what can you do this week to make a positive impact in people's lives in the name of Jesus and in the power of the Spirit?